I really thought I'd get this video done quicker. Alright, let's hit it.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to Demo Diary, where I'll be taking you through all the demos I played during the February 2025 Steam Next Fest. I thought I'd start the week with something nice and simple, so I chose Arctis. Arctis is a turn-based survival game that plays quite like a digital board game. The major mechanic and challenge of the game is the board itself, which is made up of ever-moving tiles that keep every turn feeling fresh. Despite the looming threat of harsh winters and colonizing invaders, the demo was never too challenging. Even my improvised wanderings didn't cause any great loss, although there were significant chunks where I felt a little aimless, far away from meaningful mechanics, and waiting for narrative progress to just appear out of thin air. I lost my daughter and her father during a snowstorm that struck around midwinter, and it wasn't till the end of summer, partly due to circumstance and partly due to my decision to spend 3 turns building a church in exchange for clothes, that I got my first hint of how to find them again. The thing that really drew me into Arctis was the art style, which I think works really well in its favour. It's simple and immediately legible, but vague and indistinct to create an air of mystery and otherworldliness that bolsters the tone of the narrative. The moose walk on long, giraffe-like legs, adding a sense of wonder to what would otherwise be unremarkable resource icons. I mistook the ship the foreigners arrived on to be some form of spacecraft at first, interpreting the swaying of its hull and sails on the sea for the bobbing of some Denis Villeneuve-style UFO suspended in the air above. Even the weapons of the foreigners carry this design, the shape of a rifle, instantly recognizable to modern eyes, but at the same time lacking detail in a way that suggests the lack of understanding your characters have for those strange metal tubes. The demo was ultimately fun enough, but had neither a killer hook to make me want to play more, nor the challenge to inspire me to master the systems. All warmed up now, I thought I'd set my sights a little higher for my next game. And Lone Soul's demo had been sitting in my Steam library for a while, even before the next fest had started. I had actually launched a demo the day before, but had been greeted with a notification letting me know that a big update was coming for the next fest. So I decided to wait. It seemed only fair to let the devs make the best first impression possible. And just, wow, what a first impression it was. I've never played a game less responsive than this. My attacks, both melee and magical, do not come out on command, but at their own whims. The game wishes to encourage a fast combo-based combat system, but I can't even use my basic abilities with any consistency, let alone string together inputs to get the spells I want. The one thing that seems to work is the dash, and even then I might be being generous to the game, because it still sends me to places I don't expect, and suffers from an unfortunate bout of enemy collision, as the game loves to mob you with crowds of enemies, the closest the game comes to threatening. I didn't dislike the enemies, it's just they were not my biggest threat. Their attacks are well telegraphed, although it can be hard to tell if they connect or not, and to complete half of the challenges in the game, I simply have to ignore them long enough for a timer to run out or a bar to fill. Truthfully, it is only on the rare occasion that I actually have to interact with them that they become a bother, and I imagine that wouldn't be so if my character actually did any of the things I was telling him to do. The biggest frustration with the game's element system is it being tied to a mana system that seems like another obstacle to my execution. If spells are already executed through skill expression, the correct timing and order of inputs, and certain enemies only take significant damage from certain spells, why should I sometimes have to suffer being shit out of luck when I'm out of mana and therefore unable to execute those spells? Oh, and also the basic attack combo has a finisher that consumes mana for some reason, so trying to regain mana is a chore in holding back even in the most pedestrian combat. The elemental system also infects the needlessly convoluted inventory system. Your character carries 5 different currencies in each excursion. Gold, a generic currency used to buy items, and 4 elemental currencies tied to 4 patrons, used to upgrade items of their element. The values of these currencies are high enough to feel arbitrary, and it doesn't help that certain upgrades require a certain patron's shrine to be present at the end of a room, something I could not decipher any hint of when selecting a room, despite 2 largely unexplained icons and a floating head failing to assist in that choice. It feels needlessly complicated, as do the 6 available inventory slots for the sword, mask, and armor piece, which seems to boil down to 1 equipment slot and 5 empty slots to carry trash to the next vendor with. Certainly, the game failed to incentivize me to change gear on the fly, partly because equipment changes meant only minor statistical differences, but also because the equip button was bugged to be the same as the sell button in the menu. Coincidentally, the same buttons used for melee and ranged attacks. This, fortunately, was a problem resolved in a later patch, but it was the only problem that seemed to be solved by that patch. The art style, character designs, and vocal performances were satisfactory, although the level design seemed to be failed by flat, dull lighting. This game is clearly inspired by Hades, but it has a long way to go before it can properly compete on that game's level. What a pleasant surprise it was to move from a game with ambitions greater than its competence to a game of tiny scale and solid execution. Nekomancer of Nowhere is a puzzle game that sees you drawing magic sigils with your mouse to aid your wizard cat character in exercising a tower of trapped spirits. With aesthetics and mechanics befitting an above-average student project, Nekomancer offers a short but enjoyable romp. While even the later levels offer little challenge, either from the enemies or the puzzles, the game possesses a charm that is sufficient to carry it through to the end of the demo. Whether that charm would be sufficient for an entire game, or how long the game can really be given the simplicity of the presented mechanics and levels, is more open to speculation. Inputs were occasionally unresponsive, but the game's drawing mechanics and health system are generous enough to compensate for the friction. I see no grand destiny in this game's future, but that's by no means because of a lack of quality or creativity. Beholder Conductor is what I believe to be the 4th game in the franchise, although newcomers like myself should find little friction in this spin-off title being their introduction to the series. In this 45-minute demo, players assume the role of a civilian in an authoritarian state, assigned to manage the passages of a new train with a mysterious agenda. The gameplay experience bears strong similarities to Papers, Please, with you checking tickets for incorrect information, spying on passengers for illegal or potentially suspicious behaviour, and frantically searching through their luggage before they return to their seats. There are also a string of narrative choices throughout the demo. Some are simple, or do not fully realise their consequences in the time the demo allows. The ramifications of picking up a stray cat, for example, are left undiscovered. At one point, my co-worker and tutorial person asked me to buy him some drugs to prevent his war trauma nightmares from disturbing the passengers. My options were to ignore his request, or to purchase one of 2 items from a nearby salesman: expensive antidepressants, or a cheap cocktail of random drugs. With a looming debt hanging over our dear Conductor's head due to some history with some unsavoury figures, I decided to forego the expensive drugs and try my co-worker's luck with the pick and mix. Sadly, the side effects of the drugs were enough to get him fired next time I saw him. I suspect that there was no solution for me to truly help the man. Other quests are more elaborate, revealing themselves slowly over the course of many days and destinations. The main one in the demo centres on a passenger who starts off with giving me the choice of either taking a toy bear or a gun off her, and ended with me accidentally feeding her convict husband her own drug-laced cakes. The game has very little in the way of friction. All the UI elements and controls are intuitive and work well, and the game's writing is watertight enough to handle its authoritarian subject matter with grace. Hopefully, this game will be a promising entry for players both familiar and new. Fire Hero Pixel Rescue is an endearing, if amateurish, puzzle platformer. The localization doesn't do the demo any favours, nor does the game's lack of context for inputs. Progressing dialogue will also pick up or drop items, and it was possible to enter a level while trying to exit the game. My initial takeaway from the game is that it lacked commitment to its timing gimmick. The game operates on a heat gauge that acts as a life timer, but only when out of water, which you are submerged in surprisingly often. That, combined with the ability to quickly restart any room in each level at any time, suggests that the first half of each level is supposed to be more of a methodical puzzle platformer vibe that the heat gauge doesn't support. I discovered later, after entering the second set of levels in the sewers, that this mechanic isn't even central to the game. The second half of each level is a Wario Land style dash to the exit with your rescued civilian, or civil, as the game's translation refers to them as. This is better executed, although the relative brevity and simplicity of these segments compared to the other half of each level leaves me with not much to analyse or appreciate. The game reminds me of playing free Flash games on my school library computer. That is not entirely a compliment. Paper Animal Adventure is a colourful little mystery dungeon crawler populated with cute critters. Players will choose from a short list of starting characters to explore simple levels in search for their missing king. Combat is in real time, although quick reflexes are not nearly as necessary as good observation and careful positioning. Each character has a simple melee attack and a special move. Melee attacks work on a charge basis, and their charges can be filled quicker by constant movement. Special attacks, such as bubble projectiles, cleaves, and healing, are made available via generating hype from basic attacks, and persist between fights within a level. Combat is not a great challenge in PAA, although it is punishing. A few mistakes will quickly reduce your character's meager hit points to 0. Progression in a run is determined by a number of resources. Firstly, new companions can be rescued from cages in levels, and you can swap between characters on the fly to make use of their special abilities or even just their independent basic attack charges. A player can only ever bring 2 characters into a level at a time, however, and once a character is reduced to 0, they are removed from the run permanently. Combat will grant these characters XP, which can be cashed in at camp levels for one of a number of random stats. Different stats have different XP costs applied to them, and rerolls are available, so the game seems designed to have you using a different build every run. Food items can also be found in levels, which can either be in raw or cooked at camps, provided you have successfully stolen the cooking pot in a previous level, of course. Food items can either give characters temporary or permanent stat boosts, although recipes and combinations are again left up to the player to experiment with. The game's meta progression, as far as I have deduced, is fairly minor. Players unlock new characters, levels, and achievements, the last of which provides the player with card packs to fill out their collection. Paper Animal Adventures is exactly what it presents itself as, a casual, cutesy roguelike with just enough depth to add some variety between runs. It might not set the world on fire, or even burn your house down, but it is competent, it is charming, and it is fun. Oh man, I was excited for this one. Nitro Gen Omega is a tactics RPG where you direct a group of pilots in control of a single mech. Your time will be divided equally between combat, downtime activities, and basic management. Combat forms what I would consider to be the meat of the game, where your mech will face off against a small number of enemy machines. Combat is timeline based. Each action requires a certain number of time slots to fulfill, or can only be active for a set period of time. At the start of combat, enemies will telegraph one of their actions, although the details are unclear. After committing to your first action, the rest of the enemy's actions will also be telegraphed, although still presented in categories, i.e. movement, attack, special, etc. The specifics of these actions can be discovered through the scan action, which reveals 4 of the possible 6 slots in the timeline. It is then up to the player to determine which actions to take to survive and defeat your opponents. Each pilot assumes one of 4 roles in the mech: pilot, gunner, engineer, or operator, each with their own unique skills, determined by your mech's parts. Each pilot gets 1 action they can spend per turn, so it's important to have your pilots work in concert with each other and not trip over each other's toes. Combats can be very short and satisfying, and the enemy designs are varied enough to require a player to adapt to a given encounter. The low-level encounters that I occupied the majority of my time in the demo with did risk becoming a little repetitive after a couple of hours, however, with the objective of each being exactly the same each time. And there were some encounters where I was just going through the motions. These low-level encounters have their place, however, as combat in NGO carries significant risk. Both your mech's defensive options and hit point pool start off quite limited, and repair costs can stack up quickly if you don't take care of your machine. Furthermore, taking too much damage risks injuring your pilots. Minor injuries are nothing to be too concerned about. They don't prevent your pilots from acting and will heal up on their own pretty quickly. But pilots with minor injuries can sustain major injuries, which require you visit a hospital to recover from. It is possible for your pilots to die, and this is permanent. You'll need to recruit someone else to replace them from the local bar. The loss and subsequent replacement of a pilot will have effects most immediately realised in the downtime section of the game. After each mission, the game rewards the player with 4 tokens that can be spent on activities inside your ship. These activities include changing your character's bonds, improving their moods, and providing them additional experience to their skills. Improving characters' relationships into friends or reducing them into a rivalry allows for additional actions to be taken in combat. Friends can sacrifice their actions so that their friend can take a second turn, and rivals can steal actions from their counterpart. Mood reduces after encounters and when sustaining damage, although I found little challenge in keeping it topped up. Boosting a character's skills allows them to improve their grade faster than they would through combat alone. Each grade improvement unlocks a random passive ability from that ability's pool. As it is quicker to level lower grades than higher grades, it can be tempting to boost your characters into jack of all trades and have an early lead on bonuses, but keep in mind that some passives are locked behind which seat the pilot is filling, so there's a chance to get passives you likely won't get use out of. It's this downtime section where the weaknesses of NGO starts to show. By the end of 2 hours, I was already starting to run out of significant options during downtime. mostly just topping up the small losses in mood incurred through combat. It's also just a bit of a pain to navigate the interior of the ship, having to move largely room by room, with no map or menu from which to quickly move between the games room and the gym. In fact, in its current state, the ship is as much filled with empty rooms serving as hallways as they are rooms with actual options. There's a degree of busy work that feels unnecessary and unsatisfying. This is again reflected within the overworld. Navigating an NGO is largely a chore, moving from city to city to pick up contracts and check stores' randomized stock for new parts and downtime equipment. I'm not sure whether this was a bug or intentional, but after the first contract, the mission marker never appeared on the edge of my screen to give me a direction to head in to find the mission. This meant I would have to circle the island, hoping to spot the little gold and black exclamation mark amidst the geography, rather than just heading straight there and getting to the fun part. This exercise also increased my consumption of fuel, a resource that I think has not been utilized successfully in this demo. Fuel is required to move your ship around, but it is neither limited, scarce, nor expensive. It is barely a dent in my budget to load up on fuel as and when needed. The question then is, why is it included at all? I think this is indicative of the game as a whole. There's a great deal of style and potential within it, but the balance isn't quite right to make all the systems feel worthwhile. Most, in my experience, felt like chores. And generally speaking, this game could use some pretty simple quality of life improvements. Currently, there is no simple way to compare mech parts either in the shop or in your own inventory, instead requiring a degree of back and forth and memorization to be able to tell how new equipment stacks up against your current parts. Furthermore, the game is lacking tooltips on what certain statuses, such as the track status, mean. And there's other just unintuitive oddities in the UI, such as ending a turn in combat by clicking on your grayed out pilots on the left side of the screen, rather than the prominent done in the bottom right hand side. I like this game, both in terms of its mechanics and presentation, but I'm hoping that the final product will be able to sand off some of the rough edges without losing any of its attitude. Now this is a finely tuned machine. The King is Watching is a real-time resource management / city defense game. You play the role of the King, deciding which buildings to construct in each of your 16 available slots. Careful placement is important, because only a few buildings can be active at a time. You start with an L-shaped border with which to highlight 3 neighbouring tiles. Active tiles will produce resources, or consume resources to produce troops. It is important to keep track of what resources you have and anticipate which you need to produce, as an ever-increasing army is sending wave after wave to assault your city walls. The game has a few other systems to add some variety. Prophecies allow you to pick the next 3 waves of enemies and their related rewards. Events offer you the chance to gain bonus resources or troops. Shops can provide you additional resources, buildings, trinkets, and spells. Said spells are consumables that help you boost production or protect your walls. Buildings also work on a consumable basis. You can destroy unwanted buildings, but you do not necessarily regain the ability to build them. Buildings also work on a tier system. Low tier buildings produce basic resources, whereas higher tier buildings may consume basic resources to produce rarer resources or stronger troops. It can be a bit paralysing, to say the least, but the game does at least allow you to control its speed and even pause if you need time to think. It's not the sort of game that seems to expect you to gather all possible resources in your city, but rather specialise into producing a few rarer resources, which helps keep variety on each run. Oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't mention, this is a roguelike game. This was the Steam Next Fest. Everything's a bloody roguelite. Overall, from what I've seen, The King is Watching is a robust game that seems about ready for launch, which isn't something you can always say for the demos at Next Fest, nor is it even necessarily expected. Each system works well, it is clearly communicated, and it feels like a part of the full package. And while it kicked my ass, I would say that was me failing the game, not the game failing me. Oh, if only I could say the same for Machine Mind. I don't want to suggest that Machine Mind is a poorly made game, or even a bad one, but the demo was not what I would consider a tight experience. Part base builder, part automation game, part Lego car kit bash, Machine Mind sees your character's mind trapped in a cube that pilots a fully customizable vehicle in an apocalyptic wasteland. Your task is to gather resources, construct buildings and defences, and upgrade your vehicle to help scavenge and survive as gangs of Mad Maxian bandits attempt to destroy you. The pitch, at least, is strong, and I can say that at the very least, Machine Mind delivers on that premise. But after completing the demo in just over 2 hours, I was not left feeling like I was eager for more. The main sticking point for me was navigating the interface. As you might imagine from my description, Machine Mind offers a variety of systems that a player needs to interact with in order to progress, the majority of which is done through various screens and menus. The developers have made the not unreasonable decision that the majority of these menus are navigated primarily via the keyboard. The mouse, for the most part, only sees use when dis- and reassembling your machines, placing buildings, and aiming your weapons. This has resulted in an unfortunately bloated and clunky interface, however. It is not unexpected that there would be a high degree of menuing in a game like this. However, it felt like there was always one step too many to getting what I wanted out of Machine Mind. That is supposedly where the automation comes in to alleviate some of this busywork, and I can say that these elements worked largely as intended, but that's all I can really say on the matter. Ultimately, I have found my experience with Machine Mind to be less than the sum of its parts, always feeling like I was putting too much effort into the game for not enough reward. Hopefully, with a little bit of cleaning up, the game will be much more compelling when it releases. The next demo I played, by contrast, had no trouble appealing to me, even if it was in a much more obviously unfinished state. Brew is a roguelite that's brimming with charm, both in its magical aesthetics and its anthropomorphic cast. You play as a little mouse alchemist, the newest student of a magic university with a somewhat unorthodox curriculum. Once a day, students get to climb the tower, facing off against enemies and their teachers in order to discover what secret is hidden at its top. Your combat toolkit starts off fairly basic. You can shoot, jump, dodge, and have a melee attack on a short cooldown. The way Brew mixes up its formula is through the use of potions. While scaling the tower, you'll gather ingredients that can be used to make potions with different elemental properties: fire, water, and air. Each potion can be used in one of 3 ways: thrown as a form of grenade, drank to augment your moveset, or loaded into your gun as ammo, changing the properties of your gun. What's most inspired about each of these potions is how each element does something unique. Each potion confers significant mechanical differences to make player choices feel important. While your alchemical abilities are largely consumables, the tower does offer players additional passive augments that stick with them throughout their run, as well as the option to further specialise into potions to get more bang for your buck. Rooms are selected through a Hades-style gate system with easy-to-interpret symbols. Enemy variety is pretty low in the demo, although varied enough to keep encounters entertaining, and the boss fight against your first teacher, Professor Aquila, feels like a proper test of your skills and build. Progression outside of the tower was not fully implemented in the demo, so it's harder for me to gauge its significance or success. The game has introduced the idea of an ongoing narrative with you and your fellow classmates, however, which might appeal to those looking to spend more time with the adorable animals, but might not be a selling point for those just looking to grind out runs. Brew has yet to be given a release date, and I hope the dev team are given plenty of time to realise this game's full potential before it comes out. As it stands, it's already a fun time as is, even if you can still see the scaffolding up around the place. Demon Tides, however, is a game that seems more than ready to hit the storefront. This collectathon comes fully packed with a platforming moveset that takes clear inspiration from both Mario and Sonic's 3D outings, with enough ideas of its own to stay fresh. The game wastes no time teaching you how to combine its arsenal of movement options to maximise your momentum and explore its islands looking for currency, augments and gears, an equivalent to Mario's stars. There's a real satisfaction to chaining seamlessly from move to move, bouncing around the environment with ease. The game does not require a great deal of mastery to progress, however. It comes with a generous ability to place your own checkpoints and return to them at the simple expedience of holding a button, saving you time wasted getting back to attempt that failed jump, even when the game has not already provided you with a shortcut of its own. Demon Tides offers a pretty expansive packages to all types of players, in fact. Players who simply want to complete the basic gear gathering can do so with little friction, as discussed. Players who see more appeal in the collectathon aspect have a decent selection of treats and trinkets to hunt down, including talismans that significantly modify the player's moveset, and have the option to summon a giant pink arrow above their heads to point them in the direction of any currency they're missing in a level. And for the speed demons, completing any island unlocks the leaderboard for that level, allowing players to compete to recomplete the island in the least amount of time. This, combined with the graffiti, a means with which players can decorate others' worlds in a system reminiscent of From Software's action RPGs, shows an interesting and unintrusive inclusion of online asynchronous multiplayer in what is otherwise a purely single-player experience. Combat, while present, feels more like an afterthought, lacking the sheer variety of options and challenges afforded the platforming skills. I did not get to attempt any of the big boss fights one of its NPCs helpfully teases, so their quality and complexity is yet to be determined. To say that there is no jank in Demon Tides demo would be overselling it, but most of the jank lands more on the charming side than the frustrating one. While there were times I felt I had made no mistakes and still failed to execute a maneuver, my experience was more that Demon Tides was simply adhering, correctly, to a rather strict understanding of its own rules, and it was my job to adapt to the game rather than the game to accommodate me. The game might not always be as generous as a Mario Galaxy, but that's not necessarily a flaw, and the game can otherwise go round for round with its competitors in terms of its presentation, music, and style. I look forward to seeing what more Demon Tides has to offer when it releases later this year. After the excitement and attitude of the previous day's games, I decided to start the fourth day with something more sedate. Now, to describe Wanderstop's opening cutscene as anything other than intense would be misleading. The game makes it clear from the outset that its cozy farming sim mechanics are going to work in contrast with the story of an emotionally broken gladiator. Things do start to calm down shortly afterward, albeit with an undercurrent of tension and toxin. The addition of a strong narrative element, especially one so subversive for this traditionally easygoing genre, is the key marketing appeal of this game, and with Davey Redden and Carla Zamonia's names attached to the project, there is a high degree of pedigree and expectation behind the writing. Said writing makes a strong first impression. Alta and Boro, the game's principal characters, work well together as an unlikely duo, and the latter's eccentric way of speaking never becomes too distracting. The player has some freedom with Alta's dialogue, and although inevitably constrained by the trajectory of the narrative, these decisions do allow a strong degree of roleplay in what kind of person the player believes Alta to be. The most interesting choice from my time in the demo was the ability to forego telling Boro Alta's name, a decision that sticks around for a few rescues, until Alta eventually reveals it on her own after the mask slips from her design.
I know writers who use subtext and they're all cowards.
The narrative elements did make up the majority of my time in the demo. When the demo concluded after nearly an hour's play, I had only been introduced to the basics of what the game was offering in terms of gameplay. For what it's worth, what elements I did get to experience seemed to be just involved enough without overstaying their welcome. Activities such as planting crops or navigating the giant tea machine require some degree of brain power, but the more menial tasks such as harvesting ingredients and watering the plants are conducted simply and efficiently. It's a small point, but I do enjoy the way Alta is animated as she goes about her task, moving in a snappy, aggressive manner befitting someone who has no interest wasting any more time than she has to on these agricultural activities. Wanderstop's demo ultimately served as little more than a teaser of what the game proper has in store, but I reckon it still provided players with enough information to determine whether this seemingly niche game at least has the right flavour for them. With the game now being released, it appears that the demo is unfortunately no longer available. God, I took so long making this video.
Will this fit your grappling hook?
Tough, flexible, good length. Can't wait to test it out.
For those looking for a different outlook on violence, might I suggest Chains of Freedom, a tactics RPG with some interesting systems under the hood. You lead a small band of soldiers hunting down a rogue scientist on the behalf of an unmistakably authoritarian regime, attacking scavengers, mutants, and incredibly territorial farmers in order to keep your government's version of peace. While the bread and butter of the game's combat is more in the vein of your modern XCOMs and Wastelands, Chains of Freedom uses neither the mission-based structure of a roguelite nor the open zone structure of other tactics RPGs, instead guiding players through narrow, corridored environments and a steady, structured narrative. This, combined with the simple, limited resource crafting system, suggests a certain degree of survival horror DNA has made its way into this game. Players have to strike a careful balance of risk and combat. Playing too safe will lead to wasting ammo and being reduced to melee weapons. Too risky, and you'll burn through your limited healing. You've got a few features to give your death squad an advantage over their targets, however. First of all, the game features a simple stealth system that allows players to avoid guard patrols if they need to conserve ammo, or, more likely, choose the timing for when to ambush their enemies. It doesn't necessarily have the elegance of a primary feature, and you should be warned that you cannot initiate combat while an enemy is in the middle of detecting one of your characters, but it's an interesting little extra that grants players some additional agency. Secondly, this game features a major customization system with its biocrystals. Each one of these rare collectibles comes with a unique perk that they grant the character you equip them to. Some are simple yet significant stat changes, some provide useful passives, and some even come with significant trade-offs for people who like some risks with their rewards. This supernatural system seems to offer the real meat of Chains of Freedom's character customization. While the game does not offer distinct classes, you can start to invent your own with the right combination of crystals, especially when synergized with your choice of weapons and characters' individual abilities. It's still yet to be seen if Chain of Freedom's linear structure will keep its appeal over the full campaign, or even if the game will stick with it throughout, and how deftly it will navigate its heavy political world building. But if the somewhat overcooked presentation doesn't deter you, I'd suggest keeping an eye on this one. A game that most certainly won't need my help to get any eyes on it is Monster Prom 4 Monster Con. In this fourth entry in Beautiful Glitch's absurd hijinks simulator series, the developers seem to have returned back to the formula that made the first two games successful. It caught me somewhat by surprise that Monster Con would be another competitive dating sim party game after the team behind it started branching out mechanically with Monster Road Trip a few years ago. Fortunately, this demo promises new features that should make Monster Con distinct from Monster Prom and Monster Camp. Unfortunately, none of these features are shared as part of said demo. In its current form, Monster Con's demo plays it safe. The only new material it presents is the arrival of 4 new characters to interact with and potentially win over, accompanying the familiar faces of Liam the Vampire and Zoe the Eldritch Horror. The rest is a reinstatement of what fans of the series have come to expect in terms of writing and tone, only now with a new context and aesthetic to explore. While the experience of playing the MonsterCon demo matches the quality of the previous entries in its franchise, there's not enough present in it as it stands to determine if it justifies itself as a true evolution of the series, or is simply treading water until the 5th game finishes development. Haste Broken Worlds is a game I've only ever seen snippets of on social media, but from what little I understood of the game, I knew I had to try the demo out at this Next Fest. My lack of familiarity with the game was quickly made clear as I was surprised to discover that this momentum runner was actually another roguelike. I can't say exactly what I had expected of Haste before playing it, but I was not expecting a series of short, procedurally generated stretches of land to be speeding through in between a Slay the Spy inspired node map. With that recalibration out of the way, however, it's time to assess Haste on what its demo actually is. And what it is fun. Any game that can properly capture the joy of moving at speed is going to be a good time in my book. And one that can make you feel the high of building and maintaining momentum, especially so. And, as with just about every momentum-based movement system, Haste's highs are high, and its lows are low. Moving fast and narrowly avoiding obstacles put me in a perfect state of flow. And when I lost that speed, it felt like I personally had been hit in the face. I was fortunate enough to have a friend play the Haste demo around the same time as I did, and they shared some pretty good advice. Stay low to the ground. Haste's momentum system grants players speed boosts based on the trajectory they hit the ground at. A perpendicular collision will stop you in your tracks, landing near parallel gives you a big boost. And you're going to need those boosts. Haste isn't a game where you've got time to look around and figure out your route. There's a wall of death hot on your heels at all times, the unmaking of the world breathing down the back of your neck, and you need to get to the end of the level before it unmakes you too. Sailing high into the air might give you the best chance to avoid hazards and read the direction of the stage, but you'll lose all your momentum while you're up there. While a traditional momentum platformer will have you learning through trial and error to anticipate the features of their bespoke levels, Haste's random jumbles of peaks and valleys encourage only reaction. There's no time to plan, no opportunity to predict, not least with every level littered with obstacles that seem less intent on blocking your path than they are your sight. And this can lead to some frustrations. It's possible to feel like your abilities are undermined by the level generation at times. Not challenged, but failed. Sometimes great chasms will have spawned in that you haven't the opportunity to avoid, or a cliff face you haven't the height to scale, or sometimes the level itself will simply disappear from under you as it veers wildly off in a direction you couldn't possibly have predicted. There is a safety net to this. The game provides the player with 3 lives in each run, which means that a disastrous collision or misstep can be remedied in a second attempt. This is, of course, assuming that you have the possibility to learn or react your way out of a particular brutal level generation, which the game, again, does not give you a lot of time to do. In my worst performance during the next fest, I managed to lose all 3 lives to the same section of the same level. This is not necessarily unheard of in roguelikes, it is usually taken for granted that some scenarios you just crash out on, and you just have to move on to the next run. Unlike its turn-based peers, however, Haste has the unfortunate burden that these scenarios just feel much worse by comparison. There are sparks, the game's currency, that appear throughout each level, which seem to be designed to guide the player in the right direction, right until they point you directly into a big pit. While finding your own route is part of the challenge of Haste levels, I would appreciate a little more signposting of when its levels twist and turn, if for no other reason than I sometimes waste precious seconds having to re-find the floor, and the grading system for clearing levels is so tight. The currency and item system, while competent enough, does not significantly change the manner in which you play Haste, usually just providing minor rewards for playing good and taking risks, or compensations for playing poorly. At the end of the day, Haste's basic tools are the main draw of the experience. While I have aired some frustrations here, I should reiterate that I thought Haste's demo was fantastic. And it was one of the few demos I went back to play more of after I had finished it. In fact, my first run of Haste was probably my best. It was only in these later sessions that I started to run into some of the frictions I mentioned. I hope to play more of Haste soon, and I look forward to seeing what else the team behind it has in store beyond this first stage. Man, I never thought I'd end up back here. For those who don't know, back in the early days of this channel, my friend John and I streamed through 2.5 Danganronpa games on Twitch.
I hear kids these days, they don't even say thank you anymore.
It is the greatest romance of all time.
I blame the parents. They haven't properly taught them the meaning of thank you.
I'm gonna kill you. I'm gonna kill you myself.
It's very important to express gratitude to someone who has done something for you.
For his neutral special, Monokuma wields a gun.
Yeah.
It will make the person feel happy, and they might do something special for you later.
Forget it, Mondo! I have the high ground! You underestimate my power!
In other words, thank you isn't just about conveying gratitude.
Get good, scrub!
It also conveys the expectation of a favor in the future.
Fucking degenerates, Jesus Christ.
So the more you say thank you, the more you can use the people around you.
What?
So always say thank you to people and make them do lots of stuff for your benefit.
Stand by me.
Darling!
Look what they did to my boy!
Oh my fucking god, this game. It's breaking my sanity. Fucking hell.
And playing the demo for the 100-line Last Defense Academy felt immediately familiar. Even with its long 3D opening cutscene, this game makes no pretenses that it isn't, at its heart, a Kazutaka Kodaka joint. From the hermetically sealed high school, to the 2-foot-tall mascot, to the morning and evening announcements. The 100 line follows much the same formula as its killing game predecessors, for better or worse, although the detectiving and deduction have now been replaced with a surprisingly decent turn-based strategy game. Make no mistake though, While the 4.5 hour long demo takes enough time to introduce you to its combat system, its leveling system, and its board game resource gathering missions, the majority of your time will still be spent in the classic Danganronpa visual novel storytelling. Even with a small genre pivot, I can't imagine this game being marketed to anyone who isn't at least already halfway in through the door. That's me. I'm the guy who's halfway through the door. And wouldn't you know it, a turn-based strategy system is exactly the kind of stupid shit I would need to get all the way invested in one of these dumbass games. So, here I am, John, you long-conning bastard. Late to the party as always. So anyway, the turn-based system has some nice unique twists. First of all, while the end goal of missions is still to kill everything, having your hero units fall under the brightly coloured claws of the invaders is not the primary lose condition. You will be, instead, forced to protect a small shield generator at the back of the map, and to that end, losing units is perfectly acceptable. Hell, it's actually encouraged. But we'll get to that later. Another fun twist is that most enemy units, at least early on, have only a single hit point. The challenge is not in killing them, it's in killing them efficiently. Each of your units have unique attack areas that can hit multiple units at once. The puzzle, therefore, is in properly placing your units to hit as many enemies as possible. Units share action points, meaning it's up to the player to determine if every character gets to fight in a turn, or if one or two will be doing all the work. The 100 line implements an exhaustion mechanic, however, to discourage over-reliance on a single unit by cutting their movement down to a single tile after attacking, and thus encourage you to use your entire team. Except, of course, when it doesn't. Each character comes with a unique passive. Takemaru, the biker, has an ability that grants him armor for every tile he moves, making him an excellent aggressive mobile damage soak. Hiroko, however, has an ability that grants her increased damage for every enemy she kills, but only for the current turn, encouraging you to dump all your AP into her and send her on a killing spree. It's up to the player to decide when to go all in on a single character, or to get the most value out of using everyone. Each character also has a unique super move, deployed by expending a team-wide charge, to deal damage in larger areas at the expense of stunning that character for a number of rounds. These supers can also be deployed when characters hit low health, at the cost of removing that character from the battlefield. There's a lot of reward in taking these risks, and remember, as long as the shield generator stands, any cost is worth it. From the few fights I got to experience in the demo, I can safely say that the combat is solid, and satisfying enough that I'm almost disappointed that the strategy sections of this game aren't a standalone product. It will be interesting to see how the game handles increasing your roster size in the full release. The demo has you leading 4 units to get you started, using its narrative as good justification for not overwhelming you with a dozen unique characters to be controlling from the get-go, with the promise that you'll slowly be adding units one by one as the narrative progresses. As far as I can tell, story missions will increase your available action points to match the number of characters you control. Although I imagine the battlefields are also going to have to expand if they aren't going to become too cramped. The replayable missions that can be used for grinding currency appear to have set teams you can bring into them, and the expedition sections outside of the Wall of Fire are limited to your main character and 3 other units. The expedition sections are an interesting addition to the game. In them, players navigate a board game style system of interconnected paths, choosing between 2 randomly drawn cards to determine how far they travel and thus which spaces they land on. The goal of these expeditions is to gather materials that can later be used to improve your characters, but the quality of materials varies, as does the risk involved in acquiring them. And there's little hint on your first encounter with each binary choice on what result you'll get. With bad luck sapping your character's HP and the possibility of landing on enemy combats, it's a good thing that players can bail out of these expeditions with relative ease if they don't want to risk losing their materials and wasting their in-game time. The 100 line includes an in-game countdown, a timer of 100 days that the player is told to defend the school for. Outside of story beats and set encounters, Players get to decide whether they want to spend their time improving their stats by hanging out with their fellow conscripts, grinding in the training simulations, or scavenging for resources. All three options work in concert together. You'll need the grades from hanging out, the currency from training, and the resources from scavenging in order to improve your characters. Unlike in Danganronpa games, there seems to be no risk of receiving no reward for spending time with the other characters. Currency rewards from training and story encounters seem to be determined by a scoring system, although I was able to achieve high ratings on all of the early missions without issue. Scavenging appears to be the most volatile activity, the most dependent on chance, while also being the activity that takes the most time slots, the whole day instead of merely half. The Danganronpa series' narrative structure usually meant that the effects of downtime activities were fairly minor. They granted benefits, certainly, but there was never the impression that not engaging with them would result in barring progress. Whether this will also be true for the 100 line, now that it has transformed the situation into a strategy RPG, is difficult to say. Although the fact that the devs have once again provided an option to sleep through everything that isn't story critical suggests that these systems will once again not be vital to seeing the game's credits. And that's really all there is to say. If you know about the Danganronpa series, you'll already know whether the game is for you or not. And if this is somehow the first game from this team that you've heard about, I wish you all the best. May God be with you.
Hey, who in the name of our mighty Obsidian Majesty are you lot? Spill the beans, or we'll feed you to a mag.
I also wish for God to be with the team behind Solasta II. I do not envy anyone in their position. Their previous game, Solasta Crown of the Magister, released back in 2021, into a sizable but competitive market. This sequel returns to a market with a monarch now sat atop of the throne. Some might say it is unfair to compare any new RPG to the once-in-a-generation phenomenon that Baldur's Gate 3 has become. And no RPG is so closely comparable as Solasta II. Solasta II is an RPG that, both in mechanics and world-building, closely resembles Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and to its credit, that does make it very easy to pick up for people familiar with the tabletop system, whilst also being accessible to new players. One could argue that it is the perfect time for a game so similar to Baldur's Gate 3 to step in and offer a new experience for people looking for more of what the game had to offer. That does carry with it a weight of expectation, however, one that I have every reason to believe the developers of Solasta 2 are aware of. I myself may have been unkind to Solasta 2's demo, parting ways after only an hour, rather than seeing it through all the way to the end. With the first game being a 40 to 70 hour adventure, it's fair to assume that I've only dipped my toes into this one with my short 60 minutes. But at the very least, Solasta 2's mechanics seem competent enough thus far. Combat is more or less what I would expect from a 5th edition adaptation, staying true to the rules of that system. Dialogue options are limited, usually just providing each party member with a line of questioning each, but has all been fully voice acted so far, and at a good quality too, which is no small feat. Loot and equipment systems seem practical, if unremarkable. If I were to have any criticism of Solasta 2's demo, it's gonna be one of the more circumstantial ones, which is that I was underwhelmed by the game's graphics. The very first thing I did upon starting the demo was race to the options menu to do something about the sickening way the camera moved. While the animation for characters is pretty good, giving them enough motion to make them feel like more than talking heads, the fidelity of character models has been somewhat inconsistent, with characters such as Jabori the Sickless and Daisy the Halfling Rogue faring much better than the Elf Sorcerer or the poor human fighter. I can't say whether this is an area that the developers will be working on, or even whether this is just a product of my own settings management, so the best way to determine whether this will be an issue for you is to try the demo itself whilst it's still up.
Oh, hey. Is that the junk that Jed was talking about?
That looks really cool! Hey, let me see. Come on, give it here!
The next demo, by contrast, had no problems with its presentation except, perhaps, in its excess. Rusty Rabbit is supposedly some kind of Metroidvania platformer where the player controls a small, grizzled rabbit on a quest for scrap in the ruins of a human civilization. The tutorial, in classic fashion, allows the player to come to grips with the variety of abilities and options available to the character before taking them all away in somewhat comical fashion. I can say that from this brief window, Rusty Rabbit's gameplay is competent, if unremarkable. As far as I can tell, this game is selling itself more on its aesthetic than its ideas. And boy, is this game ever trying to sell you on its aesthetic. My assumption was that after a brief period of hand-holding the player through the tutorial, the game's demo would then let me loose on a small portion of the game world. I was deeply mistaken. I have never been let less loose than in the first hour of this demo. This is because, after the tutorial, the game's story starts in earnest. And after that, there is no escaping it. The game's story insists upon itself, frequently interrupting the gameplay to reintroduce a cast of characters that I had assumed had already been efficiently introduced in an earlier cutscene. Oh no, not so, says Rusty Rabbit. You are going to spend time with these characters, whether you want to or not. And it's not that the cutscenes scattered throughout this demo are necessarily bad. The direction is fine, the animation is passable, the voice acting is solid, and the writing is just kind of there. It is one thing for these cutscenes to be stopping me in my tracks every 10 steps. It is another that they are so uninteresting. So much time is dedicated to these dialogues that just do not move me in any way. They are styrofoam, they are bubble wrap, they are complimentary breadsticks, and I was exhausted by the time that the game introduced me to its first checkpoint. Rusty Rabbit's demo is a testament to the fact that doing nothing wrong is not the same as doing everything right. I struggle to criticize it, but I am certain that I would not recommend it either. Fortunately for me, the next demo I chose was incredibly light on story. Castle vs. Castle is a roguelike card game which sees your tower, led by a knight, a witch and an engineer, face off against opposing towers with the same occupants. It is, fundamentally, a game about managing resources, both yours and your enemies. Each turn you generate bricks, swords and magic, which can be spent on cards that convert resources, attack your enemies, or defend your tower. The goal of each fight is to reduce your opponent's tower to 0 points, delightfully communicated by the structure's height. More powerful cards cost more resources, so it's important to plan ahead, to decide whether to save or to spend, and to keep an eye on your opponent's own distributions and anticipate what they are likely to spend them on. It's ultimately a simple game, little more than a glorified minigame in the demo's current iteration, but that doesn't mean it isn't challenging, and there's the traditional one more go feeling after failure. It's unlikely to set anyone's world on fire, but it might just steal a couple of hours from your afternoons. I started my 5th day of demos with a game that was definitely interesting, but I hesitate to say we hit the ground running. Break Siege is a train-based roguelike that combines the Slay the Spire card and energy system with elements of FTL faster than light and a touch of tower defense. Combat is in real time, as your train seeks to fight off swarms of flying enemies set on destroying you, but the game system simulates rounds by allowing players to draw cards and refill the energy needed to play said cards on a timed charge. Players can attack and defend themselves directly, but they also can build turrets on their train's cards to automatically attack enemies on independent cooldowns. It's all very strange, but it sort of works somehow once you're actually in the middle of it. Between combats, you'll be deciding which track your train will be following as you attempt to race to the exit before your carriage is swallowed by your pursuers, a wall of death composed of larger fleets of enemies to punish players who take too much time at stations. Stations come with the typical array of resources, shops and events that those familiar with the genre would expect to see, as well as dungeons. You can send your train's units in to gather resources at the cost of time and risk of injury. Each unit comes with a useful ability, so it's up to the players whether to risk losing them or not. There's a lot of different moving parts to Break Siege, but I'm not sure they really add up into a greater whole. My experience was somewhat marred by the inconsistent quality of the localization, although, in fairness, the more mechanics relevant text was the most legible, which is good, because even with the poor translation, some of it was head-scratching enough. Part of this was also down to the user interface, which, while passable, kind of lets down the game's pixel art. Even if all these problems are improved over time, I'm still not sure Break Siege is going to turn into something I'm going to be paying close attention to, even if it is cribbing a lot of notes from two games I quite like. Ultimately, I think this demo just lacked the sauce. The 45 minutes I spent completing it felt more like an act of inertia than genuine drive. It's possible that the developers are onto something with this gameplay formula, but if they are, my guess is that the game that really nails it will be the game that comes after Break Siege. Another game that has no shame about its inspirations is Ruffy and the Riverside, a mascot collectathon that allows players to copy elements from their environment and transmute them into other objects. We're talking turning water into lava, metal into wood, and purple into red. Along the way, you'll also be collecting butterflies, completing platforming challenges, and performing 6 skate tricks on a hay bale. Look, I think there's very little I can say about Ruffy and the Riverside's demo that's going to convince anyone one way or the other on it. I reckon one quick look at the gameplay will tell you all you need to know about what kind of game it is. It is very clearly throwing back to a specific genre of game that we don't see as often as we used to, and I think it's obvious exactly what kind of customer it's aiming to sell itself to. What I can say is that it all works very well. The movement is good, the environment's fun to navigate in a playground sort of way, and the central gimmick of changing the properties of certain features in the level is well thought out and well executed. Ruffy doesn't get permanent access to the elements they copy. There is a short window of time available to imbue a copied element into an object, and that means that it's usually pretty easy to find the element needed to solve a puzzle because it can only be so far away from the place it's needed. It's also very hard to mess a puzzle up by destroying the element you need, and you can sort of leapfrog elements over long distances if the relevant pieces of the environment are present. The game has also implemented a good system for transmuting multiple objects at once, a simple matter of painting each of the desired targets with a reticule, which cuts down a lot of potential busywork. Overall, Ruffy and the Riverside is solid. I had a good time playing it, and I'd recommend checking out the demo if you think this might be the right kind of game for you. I'm not entirely sure how to describe my experience with shuffle tactics. So, first and foremost, the title is somewhat misleading. The only shuffling mechanics I experienced were the shuffling of my deck of cards. Yes, this is once again a roguelike deck builder with a twist, taking equal inspiration from Slay the Spire, grid-based tactic games, and, somewhat surprisingly, Wild Frost. The presentation is strong, the animation particle effects gorgeous, and the rest good, but unremarkable. There are a few points of friction in my time with Shuffle Tactics. The inability to move the camera is largely not an issue, until it very much is, such as when trying to move a character behind an object or terrain, or when a character is at the very edge of a map. I also found the elite fights varied wildly in difficulty, with the worst case scenario being a slow snowball into an impossible situation, where too many enemies are spawning in with too much HP across too great a distance. Shuffle Tactics uses a mix of 1 HP grunts and some equally matched opponents to test the player's skills, encouraging players to have a mix of attacks with large areas to deal with the minions and more damaging attacks for the tougher units. The balance feels somewhat off at times, however. Stronger units can have enough HP that you need to spend your entire turn to kill them, if you're even able to do that, and you'll occasionally find yourself in situations where these enemies are spawning 2 at a time per turn. Fortunately, these nightmare scenarios seem to be relegated to these elite encounters, and I was able to complete the demo in a run where I specifically avoided them. The only question then is, what is the purpose of these elite encounters if they are so much risk for so little reward? Balance is a little all over the place in other respects as well. Shuffle Tactics is the only game I can think of that has allowed me to kill a 280 HP boss by doing 15 damage to it. The results came as a surprise to me as well, having applied the necessary debuff, which I had admittedly forgotten about, on one of several cards I was hurling at the boss each turn. If I had remembered, I would have assumed a boss would be immune to such an effect. And even now, I cannot be sure I have not misunderstood exactly how I killed the boss whose health was still in triple figures when I attacked it. This is the other major problem of Shuffle Tactics, the way that it communicates information. It's not that the developers aren't trying. All the information is more or less available if you know where to look for it, and they have provided several visual indicators to help the player. But the game can't help but just become a mess at times. Multiple different particle effects can stack over a unit's model, none of them clear enough to communicate exactly what buff or debuff said unit is currently under the effects of. I once spent I don't know how many turns attacking an obelisk that was being made invulnerable by another unit. Which one, I couldn't tell you. It's too easy for the game to be so swamped with units and effects to keep track of that the player experiences information overload. Shuffle Tactics is a game clearly designed for veterans of the genre, people who want to dive into the deep end from the start. And my god, do I hope this is the deep end. You would surely drown if it got any worse.
Yep.
I may have overcompensated with my next game, because if there's one word you can't use to describe Riff to Riff, it's busy. Chaotic on occasion, overwhelming, potentially, but the developers behind it have done an excellent job keeping its design and interface minimalist and clean. Rift Riff is a tower defense game where the player uses set tower positions to defend their base as it mines them the resources they need to build more towers. Its towers and enemies largely come in matching pairs, and the gameplay is further simplified by limiting the variety of towers a player can build in any given level to a small loadout of their choice. The game facilitates this rather nicely, giving clear information to the player about what enemies to expect at the start of the level and in between waves. It is then up to the player to decide which towers best match the enemies, the terrain, and their budget. Progression early on is steady, with the players unlocking a new mechanic after every level, and levels rarely take longer than a few minutes. With the simple controls, beautiful pixel art, and short level times, if you had told me that this was a much anticipated escapee from the Apple Arcade, I would have believed you. As it stands, it has all the making of an excellent real-time strategy game, and hopefully, something of a cult classic.
Understood.
Over here!
I could not have had a more disparate experience following Rift than Wartorn. Wartorn's combat demo was one of the big swingers of this next fest, a roguelite real-time strategy game boasting a complex elemental system. And it was certainly one of the more memorable experiences of the week. Wartorn was the only demo that I tried that required me to run it as administrator. Booting it normally would leave me with a dark screen after the dev and publisher logos passed by. It was also the only demo that prompted my computer to request an installation upon launch, and did so every time I launched it. It was a surprising amount of work for a demo that lasts around 30 minutes, and that's including the load times. I need to insist on this because it should not be understated. The levels in Wartorn's demo last only a few minutes, with perhaps a couple of fights in each. There are times when loading into the level took about as long as it took to play them, especially on my second playthrough where I knew what to expect. That second playthrough was where the limits of the demo really started to show. I had closed the demo before completing it on my first attempt, and going back to capture footage, I learned that there was no save function. That's fine, that happens in some demos. I believe there was a warning of such at the beginning of the game that I had just looked over. So I played through it a second time, and this was when I realised that every scenario in the demo was exactly the same. This isn't to say that there are none of the roguelite functionality that the game claims it will include. It manifested in a choice of 3 random units after each mission. This random selection is curious because of how it relates to Wartorn's elemental system. Certain combinations of elements lead to additional effects. Using a water element ability heals plant units, and also extinguishes fire. Applying tar to units makes them burn for longer when hit by fire, or crystallize and shatter when struck by lightning. As you might imagine, there's a lot of extra power to be gained by properly combining your unit's elemental abilities. But because the unit selection is random, you have no guarantee that any of these synergies will be available to you. Another challenge the game presents is the persistence of unit deaths. Your units are made up of a number of combatants, ranging anywhere from a single fighter to a dozen. When the health of units comprised of multiple fighters is reduced to certain thresholds, they permanently lose that fighter, lowering their max HP and damage. This loss carries on between levels, permanently hindering your ability to act in a game that only provides you 1 new unit per level. This means that large units, comprised of a single fighter, are far more valuable, as they get a full heal at the start of each level, whereas swarming units that you'd be able to throw your enemy as fodder in other real-time strategy games are far less useful, because they'll inevitably attrition themselves into uselessness and then oblivion. It seems like a strange extra punishment on a game that already has a punishment system for losing units, that being the hope bar that reduces every time you let a fighter die. It's possible that this double down is designed to incentivize a very conservative and cautious playstyle, but I don't think the game fully supports this. The game does, thankfully, come with a slow motion feature that can be used to reposition units either out of enemy attacks or behind enemies to make use of the flanking mechanic, and I would honestly appreciate this feature being carried forward into other single player RTSs in future. Even this, however, is not enough to make up for some of the game's other problems. It does very little to help, for instance, with units finding themselves stuck on each other, unable to properly reposition for flank because they're trying to run through their allied unit to get to their target. It also seems of little use if this poor pathfinding leads to only half of a unit fighting at a time, with the other half unable to figure out how to approach the enemy, and therefore just standing there, gormless. A game with battles this aggressive, short, and punishing really needs to be firing on all cylinders if there's to be no resentment from the player for losing. As it stands, even after winning the demo, I still resented it. Perhaps it was due to the lingering aftertaste of Wartorn's underwhelming efforts, but Blightstone didn't impress me with its opening. It did a lot to win me over during the next 70 minutes, however, and after completing the demo on my second run, I will say that the dev team behind it has built a solid package here. Blightstone is a turn-based roguelike RPG that sees you in charge of 3 adventurers entrusted with escorting a floating crystal to the source of the corruption that is sweeping their lands and turning their people. Each adventurer comes with a small array of abilities and 2 action points, which can be spent on both movement and abilities. The game also encourages the use of cover and environmental interactions. The wizard can use telekinesis to hurl explosive barrels and lighter enemies around, and the druid can summon a spray of thorns from wooden objects. Some abilities are more powerful than others and have been balanced to compensate. Some abilities have a warm-up period that prevents them from being used on the first turn. Others come with a resource cost, preventing the player from using them infinitely. Resources are gathered at the end of fights and acquired or traded for in certain events. Their primary use is in camp activities, abilities clearly inspired by the original Darkest Dungeons camping abilities, that can be used to heal, provide buffs, or reveal events on the map. Resources will occasionally prove useful on the road as well, however, so there's something of a question of where a player wants to spend it. As a person who loathes expending non-renewable resources, I struggle to engage with this system, and ultimately, the game never really punished me for it. Character progression in a run is fairly straightforward. Leveling up allows characters to access new abilities or improve a pre-existing one, although the 3 options and their rarity is random. Equipment can also be found or bartered for along the way, which can provide flat stat boosts but also some more interesting bonuses as well. There are also consumables that can be used to improve a unit's stats. These progression systems are quick and clean, and it's hard to see any player getting bogged down in the menus. There's also a meta progression system present between runs, and it seems that this is going to be significant. The first meta upgrade to the crystal the game provides is a massive improvement to your party's damage output. This is also how it appears that players will be able to unlock new classes, although the party size seems like it will stay limited to 3 adventurers. I overall enjoyed my time at Blightstone. It was as slow and meditative as you might expect from this kind of strategy game, each move needing to be carefully considered. Fortunately, the game is mostly pretty good about providing the information you need to make these decisions, and the interesting suite of abilities your party provides can lead to some really satisfying problem solving. I think the biggest weakness it has at the moment is its presentation. I was not convinced by the voiceover work, and while the background music added a somber tone reminiscent of This War of Mine, I wasn't sure it was the best fit, or that the game couldn't have used more variety in its orchestra. Blightstone is undeniably good. Whether it's great enough to stand out in its field, however, I have yet to be convinced.
You listened. You came. But do you smell that?
I'm going to need a whole lot more convincing with regards to Ultra Mega Cats as well. A hero-based roguelite about super sci-fi cats? That's an easy sell. It's not an easy game to make, apparently. This isn't to say that the individual parts of UMC aren't well made. For one, the character designs are quite appealing. Your 2 starting characters in the demo are a kitten piloting a mech and a cyborg ninja cat. From what little I could see of the rat enemies I was fighting, there were some fun ideas in there as well. The voice acting is also competent. AAA actors these are not, but they sell their goofy, exaggerated archetypes well. If only the characters weren't programmed to repeat their same 3 catchphrases every time I pressed a button. What charm these characters possess quickly fades to this excruciating echoing. It doesn't help that all their lines are painfully generic. The principle behind this is sound enough. It's supposed to be a good way to communicate to the player what their character is doing. It feels more like an artifact of multiplayer hero shooters, however, where both a team of allies and opponents need to also be aware of what your character is doing. I know what my character should be doing. I'm the one pressing the buttons. What the game needs is better visual indicators of what is going on. There was many a time that I knew my ability had been used, but fewer where I had a good sense of what it was actually achieving, or even if my shots were landing, or by how much they were missing. There's also a wide variety in how clearly enemy attacks are communicated. Some are impossible to miss, and other times I couldn't see them coming, or worse, even realize I'd taken damage. This game very easily becomes super chaotic, where it's impossible to keep track of all the stuff on screen, and the best strategy seems to be to kite the enemy into a mass that you can pick away at from afar. Sometimes this strategy works too well. Some maps allow you to hit enemies so far away that their pack won't even attack you in retaliation, allowing you to pick them off one by one. This is the trouble of Ultra Mega Cats. Every compliment comes with a caveat. Every criticism feels a little overblown. Progression is another weird one. Runs in UMC are simply a series of rooms. There's no option to pick different routes for different rewards. That's fine, they're allowed to do that. Between each room, players are rewarded with either an augment to their abilities or a generic boon. The augments are interesting enough, although the game is obtuse on letting me review them if a generic upgrade gives them a boost, so I struggle to say what those latter upgrades even do. Players are also granted access to a shop between rooms, which provides 3 different kinds of upgrades: consumables, permanent upgrades, and meta currency. Now, permanent upgrades, you might be thinking, this is where the meat is. Not so. Describing them as upgrades is misleading. They are side grades at best. Devil's bargains would be more apt. They offer fairly significant bonuses at pretty extreme costs to your character's stats. They completely change the way you need to approach the game, while really changing very little about how your character plays. These would be mutators in another game, optional challenges for those looking for a challenge. It's wild to me that they are presented like this, charging you in-run currency for them. But, okay, that's fine, they can do that too. The other major category, and the one that's going to actually provide you with any sort of boost in your run, is the consumables. UMC's version of consumables are passive buffs that apply to your character for either X number of rooms or until you kill X number of enemies. They feel slight, but they are helpful, and you just need to refresh them every now and then. Considering one of the consumables increases the rate at which you acquire the necessary currency, and you can also get a discount price at the shop with an upgrade, it's actually not that hard to keep on top of all the consumables once you get the ball rolling, turning them into permanent upgrades that you have to pay a tax on. It's weird, but that's okay. They're allowed to do that. The third slot is for Nexus chips, your meta currency that you use for permanent upgrades between runs. You may buy only one Nexus chip per shop, regardless of how much excess currency you possess. The other way to gain these chips is by beating bosses. Chips work on a ranking system, with higher ranked chips needed for higher ranked upgrades. Lower ranked chips can be converted into higher ranked ones between runs. Higher ranked chips are needed to unlock higher level upgrades, and upgrades can be hero specific or general. From my experience, I think the Kitten Mech needs the upgrades pretty badly. I was able to beat the demo with the Huntress, but the mech just does not seem to have the tools it needs to stay alive. Perhaps the experience is significantly different in co-op, which I assume the game is aiming for, but as it stands, I can't see myself inviting a friend to play this with me and keeping my pride. From one odd fusion of genres to another, the next demo was the much simpler Arcane Trigger, a roguelike focused on a Second Amendment sorceress. In this demo, your Lil Witch defends herself against a tide of enemies with the help of magic bullets. Each bullet belongs to one of the 4 primary elements: fire, water, wind, and earth, and trigger associated effects. Fire bullets typically apply burn for extra damage, ice applies frostbite to slow, wind bullets push enemies away from the witch, and the earth bullets summon larger attacks that trigger after a delay. There are also other effects. Earth is the element most associated with applying shield to protect your witch, while ice appears to have the most summoning abilities, for example. Your goal is to fill your magazine with bullets in such a way as to eliminate as many enemies as possible as fast as possible. Enemies will attack your witch whenever they are within range, which can vary depending on the unit type, but they will also transform into a damaging attack if they are not removed by the end of a certain number of rounds. A purely defensive strategy might not be enough to protect the witch. You're encouraged to pursue maximum overkill. Bullets are made available by filling up a forging meter at the side of your magazine. A small amount of this meter can be cashed out to provide a list of 3 options. Maxing out the meter allows you to pick from a list of 4. Rerolls are available, as is the option to remove bullets from your magazine and to change the order of bullets in said magazine, but these are tied to limited charges that you can only regain through certain abilities provided at the end of stages. As far as I can tell, you can have more bullets available to your character than there is space in your magazine, with the assumed trade-off being unable to control which bullets you draw at the start of each turn. Keeping your number of bullets trimmed seems like the best course of action anyway, as you'll need to upgrade your ammunition through the use of scrolls and other consumables if you want your damage to keep pace with your growing enemies. These too are provided through the forging system, so there's some balance to be made between getting the right bullets and increasing the damage they do. You'll also appreciate keeping a reliable count of bullets available each turn in order to trigger your abilities. As you progress through Arcane Trigger, you'll be granted choices of certain passive abilities to complement your arsenal. These abilities activate after you fire the correct number of bullets tied to their listed element each round, and can have pretty powerful effects if deployed correctly, so it's always good to know you'll have the right bullets for the job every time. The game helps facilitate a variety of builds with this system. Some abilities require a high number of just a single element to trigger, while others need a combination of 2 elements. This adds a little depth to the bullet balancing act in the late game that the demo sorely needed. My biggest complaint about Arcane Trigger's demo is that it communicates how far players advance through it pretty poorly. I wasn't even convinced there was an end to the waves upon waves of enemies I was gunning down until, quite abruptly, the game just ended after one of the rounds. For the most part, this pacing issue is not a problem. It's very easy to just keep playing this game semi-mindlessly until you either die or win, kept locked in by the short cycle of synthy elevator music in the background. It's still early days for the Arcane Trigger demo, with the quality of its meta progression and the depth of its replay value still yet to be seen. It is, however, sufficiently compelling as is to be worth a shot. Play Megabonk. Play Megabonk. Play Megabonk. It's a combination of Vampire Survivors and Risk of Rain 2. It's a dopamine distribution device. It's the next big thing for the genre, and if it isn't, then we're all sorely missing out. It's 160 megabytes big. A run is 10 minutes long. I have played the demo for 5.5 hours, and I will probably play more before the full game comes out. It's a game that keeps you constantly moving, smashing pots for XP and money, opening chests for items, and touching stone faces for stat bonuses. You play as a wizard fox, or a cowboy robot, or a skateboarding skeleton. You fight disembodied heads, exploding sumo wrestlers, and Bigfoot. Your weapons and terms upgrades come in random rarities with random stat bonuses, and there is no maximum level for any of them. Items stack infinitely. Enemies sometimes drop nukes. You can invest everything you have into movement speed and jump height and just fucking go! I got hypnotized just rewatching the footage I captured, and this shit's weak compared to where I'm at now. There's a global leaderboard to track who's killed the most enemies in a run, and one for just your Steam friends. Play Megabonk. I almost overlooked it, and I'm so glad that I didn't. Play Megabonk. Seekers of the Eclipse sells itself as a roguelite city builder, and that description is half right. The actual city building mechanics are fairly thin. What the game actually is a resource management card game in a similar vein to Dominion. Players have a deck of cards that represent buildings, each with their own unique sizes and shapes, and these buildings, when played, produce resources. Some consume one resource to produce another, some gain bonuses based on what they're built next to, and others come with bonus effects. The goal is to produce enough resources to meet certain thresholds, at which point the game rewards you with energy. Energy has a couple of uses, such as revealing sections of the map and eliminating enemy towers that can target your buildings, but the main priority is to build up enough energy to destroy the opponent's base. This is not a matter of simply turtling up and defending yourself until you can overpower the opponent. Seekers provides you with a base that you have to defend, but you must also complete your run before you run out of days. Each turn reduces your number of days by 1. So, you need to build an engine, a cycle of cards and buildings that are going to churn out enough resources to demolish your opponent, and you need to do it quickly. You'll get more days back after beating a level, but these aren't a resource you can squander. Between levels, players must choose one of two paths on a sort of overworld map, each with different combinations of locations that provide different services to the player. It's not just a matter of picking your preferred rewards, however, each route costs a different number of days to take. There's always a trade-off between needing enough days to survive your encounters, but also needing to invest enough in your deck to make it powerful enough to win. I'll admit to some varying success on my own part. I've managed to beat one of the bosses on 2 different runs, but utterly crumbled to another boss. Even with a demoralizing failure, however, there is something in Seeker's gameplay loop that is compelling enough to keep trying, to master the rules and systems and build a better deck next time. If there was any criticism to be made of the game, it's that it's kind of unpleasant to look at. The character art is fine, if not stylistically consistent, and the UI elements are clean and clear, but the actual levels and buildings are kind of dull and ugly, and susceptible into turning into incomprehensible soup the longer a level goes on and the more buildings fill the screen. This isn't quite as severe a problem as in more traditional city builders. In Seekers, once a building's on the field, it's unlikely you'll need to keep track of it. But it remains a shame that what I spent the majority of my time looking at in this demo had very little visual appeal. And now, finally, we reach the last demo I played during the Steam Next Fest, and I like to think I ended on a high note. Which is fortunate because going into it, I wasn't sure I was going to like Wheel World. Wheel World is a sandbox game set in a world with bikes as the core motif of its mythology. Even as a floating skull tasks me with restoring the cosmic balance of life and death, the game is delightfully unserious. While not strictly a comedy game, Wheel World's laid-back attitude and playful indulgence in its own nonsense put a smile on my face the entire time I was playing, as did the lovely palette of colours that accompanied me on my 35-minute journey. Wheel World's demo presents 2 major modes of play for the game. Free roaming exploration that allows you to see the sights, gather parts for your bike and bump into a bunch of little weirdos, and races against NPCs with a couple of extra challenges if you really want to master the courses. There's a suggestion that these two styles of play will work in conjunction. Progression through the demo is gated off by a fairly simple tutorial race, and the parts you can scavenge around the island are clear upgrades to the rusted pieces of junk you start off with. So, race to get access to new areas with new parts, get parts to keep up in the races. It's an elegant enough system, replacing parts is a simple process, and managing Wheel World's 4 stats allows for enough customization in your racing style without risking becoming overwhelming for those just looking to ride. It's fair to say that Wheel World isn't the most in-depth of racing games. It's not going to appeal to hardcore cycling sim fans, and at the same time, it's not wacky enough to be targeting the same market as more traditional arcade racers. The only power-ups in this demo are a boost meter, no weapons or speed pads to be seen. The fact that this is a single-player game with a core focus on narrative suggests that this game is aiming for something else entirely, and with the chill music, calming colours, and distinct art style, my closest point of comparison for Wheel World turned out to be Shedworks' Sable. While the meditative vibe persists throughout, don't think Wheel World will always be taking it slow. The more advanced racing in this demo is a close-fought thing, and really encourages you to push your luck and cut some corners if you want to get all the medals. And thankfully, playing this game feels fantastic. There's an excellent sense of speed and momentum here that still feels incredibly natural to your two-wheeled vehicle. The ride is smooth, the controls responsive, and there's excellent promise for hitting a flow as you weave around corners and glide past other racers. I don't care if what Wheel World's doing is weird or unconventional, because the dev team are doing it right. Whatever you do, watch this space. There's something special going on here. I'm so glad for the Steam Next Fests. Not only that Steam started to host them, but also that they've been so successful and that so many developers and publishers have embraced the practice of releasing demos again. Putting together a demo takes a significant amount of time and resources, and invites a certain degree of risk that companies have traditionally been averse to. But these demos are vital to a healthy market in the game's ecosystem. With them, players get the chance to feel the tactility of how a game plays moment to moment, to check if it includes any visual effects that might hurt them to look at, or even just know how well the game runs on their setup. Buying a game without playing a demo of it is like buying a book without reading the blurb, or buying tickets for a film having only listened to its trailer. I rarely buy a game I haven't played a demo of anymore. There's so many important details about a game that all other avenues of marketing are just unable to communicate, so it's so important that we have a thriving culture around these demos. And I appreciate the other features that Valve has rolled out over the past few years to make their platform better at supporting that. For instance, for anyone curious about the demos I discussed in this video, or any of the others featured in the Next Fest, Steam maintains a dedicated page that lists all the demos from their most recent Next Fest. So go on, find a new demo to play, and maybe you'll find a great game that you might otherwise have missed. If you need any extra encouragement, here's a list of some demos I recommend that I played outside of the window of the February Steam Next Fest. And hopefully, I'll be seeing you after the next.